Welcome to the Together for Good podcast, a podcast specifically designed to inspire, challenge, and uplift you during your daily walk of faith. Today's episode is something new. It's a new series that we're going to try that I'm calling Faith in Daily Life. What I do is I sit down with a member of Bethany Lutheran Church and talk to them about their career, their vocation, the work that they do during the week, and how their life of faith intersects with the work that they spend their time on every day. This first conversation is with Susan Pfabe-Wiggans. Susan is the president-elect for our church council, and she serves as a pediatric physical therapist and just has some wonderful things to say about how her work helping children work in their bodies and learn how to move and be healed in different ways, how that overlaps with some of her beliefs about who Jesus is and what Jesus calls us to do. It's a great conversation. Susan's an absolute delight, and I really appreciate her being on and being a part of this. Please, if you like this episode, if you like the podcast, leave us a review on the iTunes store. Let other people know about it. We're really excited about the feedback and the different ways that this podcast community is growing, and we want to see more of that. But now, without further ado, here is a Faith in Daily Life conversation with Susan Pfabe-Wiggans. Hey everybody, welcome. We are here for the first of a new series for these podcasts that I'm going to be calling Faith in Daily Life. And today, Susan Pfabe-Wiggans is sitting right here beside me. Susan is a longtime member of Bethany. She was the chair of my call committee, so a special place in my heart. And she's the current council president-elect. What's the exact title there?
President-elect.
President-elect. And Susan's going to talk to us a little bit about... We're just going to have a conversation about her life and her particular vocation, the work that she does, and how it kind of relates to her life of faith. But we'll have a fun time getting there. Susan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Pastor Nate.
We're so glad you're here.
I was just talking with members of the call committee yesterday about how we did such a great job.
I think so, too. It worked out well for me. Well, tell us a little bit just about what you actually do as work when you're not doing everything else here at Bethany.
Sure. I love to talk about my work. So I'm a pediatric physical therapist. I've been a therapist for, maybe 35 years, although I was home with my kids for about 15. Right now, I primarily work with what's called the Early Intervention Program. It's a federally funded program for children birth to 3 who are deemed to have a developmental delay. And so they are eligible for all kinds of therapy services in their home free of charge.
Wow.
And I do that through the Denver County group.
And so that means, I think I've heard you talk about this too, you go to these individuals' houses.
We do. So the law mandates we have to do it in their natural setting. So that's usually in a home or a daycare. And the reason we do that is we can do therapy with the kids, but we also see the environment that the children live in. And a big part of our job is to give them strategies that they can do throughout their day to help their children develop.
Wonderful. So I know you probably, HIPAA violations and everything else, but can you give us just a general sense of what that might look like specifically, like in terms of the types of cases you might be working with?
Sure. So, for instance, I just saw a new little child last week who is a year, who she can roll to get places, and she can sit, but she's not crawling, she's not moving on her tummy. And so we're trying to teach her, first of all, how she can get from the floor to a sitting position. So I showed her parents when they change her diaper, which they do many times a day, how they can roll her to her side and have her help her push herself up to a sitting position. So try to make it easy because we know parents are busy, and then when they maybe have a child with special needs, we want to keep it as relevant and simple for them. But that's an example of what I might tell families.
No, that's really helpful. And so then in terms of your training and background, you were trained and educated as a physical therapist?
Yes.
And then moved into the pediatric realm, or is that a specific line?
Well, yes, so I was trained just my physical therapy degree, but I've only always done pediatrics. That's all I ever wanted to do. And that's all I ever probably will do.
Excellent. Well, and I like that you said wanted to do. Okay, that's a very helpful segue. Well done. As we think about this too, you've been doing it for 35 years, you said. this is what you always wanted to do. You kind of offered that phrase in there of specifically working with younger children, pediatrics. So talk to us. I just kind of want to hear a little bit about like the direction of your life that kind of led to committing yourself to this work for 35 years. That's a very long time.
Yeah.
So let's kind of just start. Give me some like early memories.
Sure.
And we'll trace it together.
That'll be fun. So I love kids. I've always loved kids. I've told people heaven for me would be a room of 2-year-olds, and I'm 100% sincere about that. But I started babysitting when I was 7 years old for my piano teacher who adopted a baby, and while she was teaching piano lessons in her house, I would, feed the baby, hold her, change her diapers. And so I spent much of my childhood babysitting. All summer long, weekends, everything.
Do you have siblings?
2. I have a twin sister and one who's about 1.5 years younger than us.
Okay, so you didn't get to do a ton of that, like,
no
childcare at home.
Not at all.
Okay.
Right.
So 7 years old, start with this whole babysitting thing, but let's just pause there. I'll ask this question later. I kind of want to keep tracking it. Keep going. So then...
So, as I got older, so my mom both of my parents are teachers. My dad's a college professor. My mom taught kindergarten and early elementary, but was home for us most of our growing up, and ultimately did childcare in our home. And so I did have kids around the house.
Oh, wow.
Quite a bit when I was growing up. I think that started probably in my middle school and high school years. So she took care of a boy named Brian, who now is, probably in his early 40s, who is a youth pastor in Indiana. And Brian was, I don't know if I know the whole story, but he, I think, had a spinal cord injury during the birth process.
Oh, wow.
It would be similar to spina bifida, which is a malformation of the spine, but he doesn't have any of the physical attributes. So anyway, he was born and he has partial use of his arms and hands, but no feeling or movement of the rest of his trunk and his legs.
Wow.
And they were part of our church. And so when Brian was 6 weeks old and his mom was getting ready to go back to work, she knew my mom did childcare and asked if she would take care of Brian. And we became really good friends.
Wow.
Like, I would come home from high school and just want to play with him, and I'd come home from the weekend at college and I'd go to Brian's house and we would play. So he was really special.
Yeah.
And his physical therapist, whose children I babysat for, came to our house and I watched her.
Wow.
So when I started college and was deciding what to do, I wasn't 100% sure. I actually started in the nursing direction. And then after a semester decided that wasn't the right thing and decided to pursue physical therapy, and I have no regrets at all.
Wow. So this is really great. I love the pieces that you've kind of mentioned there. Because we have, starting babysitting at 7. So being put in this really trusted position to be taking care of a child at 7 years old. I would not trust my 7-year-old son.
I don't know how I was trusted, but...
But then the whole piece with Brian, it also sounded like you started when he was 6 months old?
6 weeks old is when he came to, he was at our house all day.
And it sounds like, too, Brian is the type of individual that you would be working with now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
So that all kind of got planted in these high school years and through this close friendship that you developed with Brian. So as we think about this, though, you kind of mentioned church peripherally with it. And this is how we're going to trace it back. Talk to me about what faith looked like when you were 7, starting babysitting, right? This one key moment of your life. What was important about your life of faith at that particular juncture, if you can remember?
I don't know that I can say I can remember. So I come from a family of lifelong Lutherans. Okay. My grandfather was a Lutheran pastor. I have uncles who were pastors. My mom and her siblings, we were in the Missouri Synod. Which is also very education focused. So I also went to a Missouri Synod parochial school.
Great.
So it was very, we went to church every week. We went to Sunday school every week. I had, religion classes, confirmation classes in grade school. So it was very much a part of my life. I don't know if I probably just didn't think any differently, because all of my friends, my dad taught at a Lutheran college, so most of my friends were professors' kids that went to St. John, our school. So I was just surrounded by...
It was just the constant.
It was the constant.
Okay.
And probably I didn't really have opportunity to question it a whole lot, because I wasn't surrounded by many people different than me.
Yes. Well, and I mean, I know also the Missouri Synod, as you mentioned, has a real educational focus too. But like, and you know, education in the sense of also kind of just saying like, this is the way that it is. And like learn the material, move along. Is that a fair assessment?
I would say yes, it is.
Yeah. So that also makes sense too. Like, yeah, this is just what we do.
Right.
And so if your piano teacher needs help looking after a child, one, it's exciting for you and you know, very affirming, but also it's kind of like, this is just what we do. Interesting. So then let's move and fast forward to high school, or whenever it was that Brian came under your mother's care and that became a part of your life. What did faith start to look like at that season of your life?
That's it. You know, I would have to say I don't know if again, I'm not sure if I thought about it.
You attached the two?
Right, a whole lot. Now I see it, how faith is a part of my work, but I don't know, honestly, if I would say faith had a direct impact on
building that friendship.
Right.
Interesting.
I would say probably my faith and my parents instilled very strong values in our family. I was one of those very well-behaved high school kids that followed the rules and probably every teacher loved. And I think probably some of that was faith, but I also think it was very much the way
that we were raised.
Which also was very
goes hand in hand.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then moving along and off into college, was the move away from nursing to physical therapy, was that just because nursing didn't like is there any faith connection to that shift to this moving on?
I would say no. I think at the time I thought nurses kind of did what doctors did, and I wanted a little more autonomy, and maybe it was my exposure to physical therapy as well that made me think, oh, maybe this is the direction I want to go. Yeah. So again, I don't know that I would say faith had a direct...
It's fascinating. But in the same sense, what you've described is like a constant saturation, right? Like it also doesn't seem like, with a lot of other people, their life of faith and their church community was very separate than the rest of their life. Right. But especially with your father teaching at the Lutheran school right there, going to Lutheran parochial schools, it was constantly overlapping.
It was.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's why I didn't question things a whole lot, because I didn't see different ways of doing things. I will say my parents are really true servants, I think. So my dad is a college professor. He taught history and Spanish, and we did spend my one semester of my sophomore year of high school living in Mexico. Oh, wow. And learning Spanish, but also being part of that community and seeing how people lived there, which I would say was very impactful on, I think, just seeing that there are people who don't have what we have and wanting to do something about that.
Okay. And as you think about pursuing the career of physical therapy, and even nursing before it, did you feel like there was a real strong pull to a helping profession like
Absolutely.
that? Yeah.
I was either going to go in some medical field or education. Okay. I never considered anything but those. Yeah. And one thing that I love about physical therapy is the time that you get to spend with the patients that you work with. Right. You spend a lot of time. My first job was at Children's Hospital here in the rehab department, and I spent 2 hours a day with the patients that were there who were recovering from, a car accident or a spinal cord injury or whatever. So you really develop strong relationships with them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, and you might not have even known it at the time, but in nursing tends to be, right? If you're in the hospital, hopefully you're only there for a day or two.
Right.
That switches. In my my chaplaincy training, you have to do some chaplaincy training in prep for work as a pastor.
Okay.
And my chaplaincy training was not in a hospital, and that was what I really valued about it. I was in a long-term care facility, but so over my course of my internship there, really developed relationships with all of the residents, whereas if I had been in a hospital setting, it would have been 2 days and out,
sure.
Which would have had its own advantages for training, etc. But
yep.
I know that was one thing I really valued. That's the relationship, the relational piece.
Yes.
And hearing you describe, just the way your family went about things, that you had a child care facility at your house and that people from church knew that they could reach out to you,
right.
Relationship seems like a really big, even like living in Mexico for a year. This wasn't a week-long service trip.
No, not at all.
This was investing in the place.
Yes.
Right. So, which brings us all to today, or to the last 35 years, shall we say. Talk to me about just how you see your faith now overlapping with the work that you do on a daily basis. I
think that when I think about my faith and I think about Jesus and Jesus calling, the things that I think about the most are him saying, "Let the children come to me." That maybe others thought, we don't want to bother with these little pests, but they were so important to Jesus. And that's the way that I feel. I feel like they have so much value in our world. And for me, I want to do everything I can to help them reach their potential. And I think a lot of that is from an interfaith feeling that Jesus spent his time healing. I don't do very much preaching, but he did a lot of healing. And and I think hearing that, and it's those stories of him healing others that always touch my heart when I hear them.
Yeah.
In church or Sunday school or whatever.
Can you think about, any idea why those have touched your heart so much? It's because you didn't have parents who in medical professions.
No.
Yeah.
But they were also, servants in terms of education, but maybe that's a little bit more preaching. I don't know. It's just, even when I talk about it, I just feel it physically. I just feel it in my heart that is what pulls me to do what I want to do.
Wonderful. Oh, it's so beautifully said. And that's, in a lot of ways, I think that's how this all gets lived out for people too. What is that one thing that just pulls at your heart? And thankfully it's different for all different sorts of people.
Yeah. And I think parents will comment that I'm particularly patient with their children. And I don't know if my kids would say that. But again, I do feel like that is from this inner faith of wanting to do God's work.
Yeah.
And that's directed me to do the best that I can for them. And I care about the kids that I work with a lot. I call them my kids. So, my own children will say, "Well, Mom, how are your kids today?" And one of their friends might think, "What are you talking about?" But they're really they are a very strong part of my life.
Yeah. And that's the relational piece that we've already been kind of seeing pull through this, is that being able to think of them as your own in that way and caring for them, bringing healing and health and wholeness. And related to that as well, I love the way you're talking about how these healing stories that come up in church all the time. There's so many of them. But talk to me, are there any other places where you see your work kind of coming out or being connected with what happens here at church?
I don't know if it's so much my work, but I've always taught Sunday school. So I've wanted to be with kids instead of going to adult ed. And I do find myself maybe gravitating toward kids that you can tell, do they have a little bit of a speech impediment, or is sitting still kind of challenging for them? Or, are they sitting toward the back because they don't quite feel like they belong for some reason? And I find myself maybe gravitating towards those kids and showing them that we care about them as a church, and we want them to be a part of this.
Mm-hmm. Well said, and beautifully done. And when we think about, what's really amazing about what you're saying there too, when we think about the healing stories of Jesus, and I'm thinking about this because it's where I'm going for the adult ed class that you won't be at, that I'm teaching on Wednesday. But about how healing in the scriptures, when Jesus heals, it's almost always accompanied with an element of reconnection and allowing that person to be reconnected to their community. Mm-hmm. And so even like that little work that you do here at church of just trying to get those Sunday school kids connected to the greater community, that in itself is an act of healing that we don't often talk about or lift up. So the other piece too, I want to flip this whole question on its head as well. Do you ever see ways that faith shows up during your work, when you're going out to these houses, making these visits? I know this might be a little harder one to necessarily integrate, but just curious if you had any thoughts on that.
It is a harder one. I would say if families talk about their faith with me, I am very open to talking about my faith with them. If that's not something that they bring up, I don't necessarily bring it up to initiate that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if people who I haven't had a chance to talk to my faith about, if they think I come from a Christian background or not. Mm-hmm. It would be interesting to ask them sometimes.
What I find interesting too is how you articulated for us in your little, your brief biography, how unspoken faith was. Right? That you're like, I can't necessarily put my finger on it, but it was totally there. It was always a part of what I'm doing.
Right.
And so I encourage that within you as well, is to recognize that it is totally connected with these ideas of healing, this care for relationships that you have, even if you don't speak it.
Right.
That your life is an evidence of that in a lot of ways, is that our act of faith, our living out of faith, doesn't always have to be specifically spoken in those really overt ways. And probably that can be a real turnoff for a lot of people too, I would think.
It can.
It might be professional boundaries type of thing as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so, but I guess my hope would be that the connections that I make with these children and the families, that they would see it.
Yeah, see Jesus through that work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's always our hope. That's wonderful. Well, Susan, anything else that we should know about your job that you think that people, something about your work maybe that we don't necessarily know that people should, or that they often assume? That's one of my favorites as a pastor.
Yeah. Well,
people make all sorts of assumptions about my work.
No, sure. I think, being in families' homes, you learn a lot about the families. And, so sometimes I feel like maybe I'm more of a therapist to a parent than a child.
Absolutely.
And not necessarily a physical therapist. But, and so I would say I feel, even though my background wasn't in psychotherapy, I do feel grounded, probably from faith, and thinking of Jesus' intentions to the people he served in his community, that can at least help guide me in, a direction of healing for them as well.
Absolutely. Oh, beautifully said. That's really powerful to think about it in those ways too. Well, thank you for taking time to share this with us, and for, just your general approach to life. This is very inspirational, I think, for me, and I'm hoping for a lot of people listening too, of just seeing the ways that you carry this message of Jesus with you in quiet, unassuming ways, maybe that don't get overtly stated, but that underlies so much of how you're carrying yourself in this important work that you do. So thank you listeners for being a part of this. Yes. We'll have more of this to come. Maybe we'll bring Susan back again another time too. She's got a lot of wisdom to share with us. Thanks for listening, everyone. Stay in peace.